Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7 by 7 So, let's talk about some TV commercials, shall we? It's not enough to get the trailers and teasers and behind the scenes reels and all that stuff. Hey, we get TV commercials too, and don't you know, there are some new things that we learn from TV commercials, and Solo: A Star Wars Story is no exception. So today we're talking about two of them that have just come out. One of them is titled Han, and the other one is titled Risk. And we'll start with the Han one. And in there, here are a couple of the new things that we get to see. We get to see more of the card game action that's happening, and that includes Han throwing down a set of cards. And based on the expression on his face, we can't quite tell whether it's a good hand or a bad hand. We just know that he's going, koof, and throws them down. And they cut to Lando looking off to the side with his own hand cards in his hand and whistling. And nice casual whistle from Lando, never a bad thing. We also get to see a little bit more of that desert environment that we've seen, not Lando, excuse me, not yet at least, that we've seen Tobias and Chewie and Qi'ra and Han in, and we're starting to piece that together a little bit more. So if you remember, there's an outdoor encampment sort of place where Han and Qi'ra have that exchange where she says, yeah, I may be the only person who knows what you really are. And he says, yeah, what's that, right? So it seems that Chewie and Tobias are in that space as well, and that's also nearby where that showdown between Han and that masked unknown person, Ethne's Nest, is happening. So, again, pieces starting to come together in that regard. We also get a shot of a sort of walking and talking situation where Han and Lando are walking together. Lando's got that snazzy fur coat on, and Tobias and Chewie are walking behind them. And so you start to kind of put together a couple of pieces of things. Like, for example, this could be after the card game that Lando and Han were at, and this is where they are going off to get to the Millennium Falcon, and maybe that shot that we've seen of Lando just standing proudly with the coat and looking up, that maybe he is looking up at the Falcon, and that's when we are about to get introduced to it, and that's when Chewie and Han are about to get introduced to it as well. We also have a situation on that snow planet where we get to see a couple of the swoop bikes or speeder bikes, for lack of a better or lack of a more precise term for them right now. We get to see those in a little bit greater detail. And I had seen a comment someplace where somebody was claiming that Slave One, Boba Fett's ship, was in that sequence. Well, as far as the sequence that was shown on YouTube, it ain't there unless it is really, really well disguised, or it's like some magic eye painting or something like that. It is definitely not there. That's not to say that Boba Fett isn't going to show up into this thing. I have no idea if that is actually the case, but as far as somebody saying, hey, it's at, 19 seconds or whatever it is on this particular video, it's not there unless it is really, really, really well camouflaged and disguised. Believe me, I've blown that thing up. I've gone back and forth over it, and it just ain't there. So, we'll see. Be kind of interesting to see if Boba Fett shows up and see if he is as ineffectual as he is in Return of the Jedi. Never know. And there's also a wink from Han that we get, like a scene where he goes, wink, and, you take or leave that. I think we're going to need to see it in context before we know really how well to evaluate that and how well he carries it off. But we also get a glimpse of something that Ron Howard had previously tweeted out, and that was a picture or two of Lando's cape closet, his snazzy closet. And this time we get Qi'ra standing in what appears to be the closet, and it looks like she might be trying on a cape or two of Lando's, which is a rather fun thing. So hopefully they're going to have just a little bit of time to poke fun at Lando, or just have it doesn't necessarily have to poke fun at him. It can also just be to celebrate and revel gloriously in his sartorial taste. So that should be some good fun too. And that's pretty much all that's notable, especially about the Han clip for Solo: A Star Wars Story. So now let's move on and talk about Risk, the other clip that we're going to talk about today. And this one might even be more consequential in its way. We get a shot of Tobias and Chewie and Han in a corridor. It looks like they're coming out of an elevator, and you don't necessarily know where it is, of course. It could be that sort of swanky nightclubby scene that we've seen before. It could be the inside of the conveyor, for all we know, that crazy double-sided train. So that's an interesting and intriguing hint at things. And we find out that Tobias is actually part of that swanky nightclub scene as well, and has a line where he has to tell Han, these people are not your friends. And we get to see something that we didn't have as good an angle on in the past, but now we've got a better angle on it. So there's a scene where Paul Bettany's villain Dryden Voss has this crazy, laser handheld thing and swipes down and slashes some art in his office or wherever he's hanging out. Well, based on a new angle on this, and maybe it's just a different angle, maybe it's a reshoot or something like that, but Han Solo's in that scene, and he's actually dodging out of the way of one of Dryden Voss's swipes with this laser cutter. And there's another line delivered by Tobias Beckett while he's sitting on the couch of the Millennium Falcon, and he says there's a lesson to be learned here, but that's not really paired up with anything obvious, so we don't necessarily know what lesson he's talking about. But as I said, this is really possibly one of the more consequential ones, and it has to do with the fact that there are a couple of exchanges with Lando, and not just because it's a Lando situation, but because we get a little bit more of the feel for things. He says to Qi'ra, "What are you doing with with Harry and the boy?" Excuse me. He says, "What are you doing with Harry and the boy?" So Qi'ra obviously is the person who has led Han and Chewie to Lando, and Lando is still talking about Han as though he's younger and less experienced, like that whole "I like this kid" vibe that he had that we were talking about in an earlier podcast. Now it's the boy, right? So he's definitely looking at Han and not seeing somebody nearly his equal or anything like that. And that's not just age, but experience as well. And Harry, of course, for Chewie, well, people are going to do that. But the big one that I thought was a really interesting line of dialogue delivered by Lando during their card game, and maybe this is not their only card game, but during one of them, they're talking about the Millennium Falcon, and Lando says, "Every ship is not for everyone, and this one needs a particular kind of pilot." I'm not directly quoting, but you get the idea. So how fascinating. Why are they talking about the Falcon at this point? Maybe this is just because Han is asking about the ship because they're supposed to find somebody with a ship, and Qi'ra says, "Yeah, I know a guy." And so maybe this is just idle banter about, "Oh, really? You have a ship? What kind of ship is it?" And that's it. Or maybe the betting on the Falcon has begun. I have a feeling that we are early on, comparatively speaking, in the dynamic between Han and Lando. So I don't think we're at a gambling point yet. I think we're just at an information gathering point at this point. So we'll have to see, of course, but I think that's a pretty safe bet. And that right there is going to do it for Han and Risk, the two commercials that we're talking about today. We'll talk about a couple others tomorrow on the podcast, and over on the audio version of the podcast at sw7x7.com/iTunes, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts, I will be doing a Last Jedi trivia question for you. So do check that out. In the meantime, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.